Hello, friends. I'm Jeffrey Rosen, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center, and welcome to We the People, a weekly show of constitutional debate. The National Constitution Center is a nonpartisan nonprofit chartered by Congress to increase awareness and understanding of the Constitution among the American people. This week, I was thrilled to celebrate the launch of my new book, The Pursuit of Liberty: How Hamilton versus Jefferson Ignited the Lasting Battle Over Power in America. My friend Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, convened with me at the NCC to discuss the enduring significance of Hamilton versus Jefferson, and we gave some unexpected love for an underappreciated founder, the great Gouverneur Morris. This program was recorded live in Philadelphia on October 21st, 2025. Please order the book and enjoy the show. Hello, friends, and welcome to the National Constitution Center. Please join me in welcoming the editor of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg.
You're so enthusiastic.
I'm very enthusiastic to have you here in front of the First Amendment to talk about the pursuit of liberty is the greatest joy I can imagine. So grateful to you and The Atlantic for co-hosting tonight's event, along with the Weitzman Museum for Jewish History, and so excited to appear in The Atlantic's America 250 issue, which is just this compendium of light and learning and deep illumination of American history. It's just a great honor to be part of it.
He's good. He's good. He's good.
In addition, we're so excited to be launching the American 250 Civic Toolkit. Friends, if you haven't checked it out online, you've got to do it. It will be published as a paperback by Simon & Schuster in a few months. It convenes America's greatest historians. Jeff, I haven't told you about this. It's incredible. To write about the big ideas of the Declaration and the Constitution. Danielle Allen on equality, Robbie George on liberty, Gordon Wood on government by consent. Akhil Amar has annotated the entire Declaration clause by clause.
When is it coming out?
It's online now.
Online.
Along with our interactive Constitution. And it's just this incredible core curriculum for America 250 to inspire Americans to talk about the big ideas of the Declaration and the Constitution. So we're taking it on the road across America. We've got a partnership with rural bookstores. And I just launched The Pursuit of Liberty on Sunday at Midtown Scholar in Harrisburg, which is a wonderful independent bookstore. Do you know how inspiring it is to have 100 community members come talk about the American idea with me and Justin Driver, and then debate the Constitution. It's just the best of America. So we're very excited for A250 and really excited that this event right now is the launch of a year of conversation. So Jeff, thank you so much for coming, for making the trip to Philadelphia, for including me in the issue, and for reading The Pursuit of Liberty.
Oh, I haven't read it personally. But I've had people read it. No, I actually just finished it. You all should buy it and read it. Buy it, and then read it. It's very important. Jeff, thanks for inviting me. I always love coming up here. One of the reasons I love coming here, the view is pretty good. Zahav is pretty good. The statues of the signers, very excellent, always inspiring. But what's inspiring to me is that, and this may sound, there might be a shadow of depression in what I'm about to say. It's inspiring to see an audience full of people who care about the founding documents and the founders of the United States. My deepest worry, and maybe we can talk about this, because I sometimes think of you as a happy Sisyphus. Like a very
like that Simpsons episode.
If Sisyphus loved musical theater, that would be Jeff. You're pushing a rock up a hill, and that rock it's not a partisan rock. It's the rock of serious education. It takes it doesn't take, you don't have to be a genius to understand what the founders did and what this country was built on and the documents, but you have to want to commit time to understand it, to be an active citizen. And I feel in an age in which all kinds of nefarious individuals are building technologies to sap our will to live, to sap our attention, to provide us with endless mindless entertainments. It's a hard thing, but we're not going to survive as a country if people don't know why we're a country. And I can't think of anyone. The other thing I was thinking of, he's not paying me to say this. He's not doing anything. I'm saying this on my own accord. This is we live in a dangerous time, and in my mind, a low time. Some of you saw the recent AI video shared by the President of the United States concerning poop. Sometimes it's beyond belief, but we live in it's a low time, and it can be a cynical and dispiriting time. One of the things that's dispiriting sometimes is that it's very hard to find honest brokers anymore. One of the things that makes Jeff not just an outstanding scholar and leader, but an American leader, I think, is that he does something rare in our culture today, which is he does not straw man. It's very hard to know what his personal beliefs are. And one of the reasons it's very hard to know what his personal beliefs are is that he doesn't straw man arguments, he steel mans them. In other words, he when he's writing about major figures from our past, he gives them he gives them credit. He portrays what they thought as they actually thought it. He gives the complexity and the depth of it. He doesn't just hold someone up to excoriate them and move on. He's only trying to convince you, I think, ultimately, that the founding documents are worth reading and the thoughts of the founders are worth studying. And it's a very adult position, too, because it's saying to the public, look, the whole point of active democracy, I'll put all this information out in front of you, but you're the citizen. You're in charge. And so I appreciate that about Jeff very, very much, and it's very rare to find. So you should applaud Jeff for standing for truth, justice, and the American way.
But
okay,
I appreciate that, but thanks to you for heeding that call. As Jeff said, it takes time to educate yourself about the Constitution.
I can't imagine the parking is so easy around here.
The parking is the most important thing. But these fellow citizens who've gathered here today, who come to all of our programs in person at the NCC, and who take the time to listen online to the podcasts and the videos, are the models of what the founders hoped for. And you are realizing that you have to dig deep to make up your own mind, and you're all coming to your conclusion. And that's why it's so inspiring to be part of the project. And that's why I'm ultimately optimistic about the future of the USA, because there are people like you across the country who are hungry to dig deep and to learn.
But I want you to use your eyeballs and look out at this crowd and recognize that it's not filled with 20-year-olds. No offense. But no, this is very important, because I look at our readership, I look at people who come to our events. A lot of it's a school night, it's whatever, it's all these things. But I worry, but even if you look at demonstrations across the country, you'll see that it skews in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and upward. The thing I worry about is cynicism, is a kind of passivity born of being cognitively overwhelmed. And so, this is our birthright. The documents that you discuss in this are our birthright, but if we're not communicating that to people who are 10, 15, 20, 25 years old right now, I don't have that. I'm neutral on your optimism, but I don't have a good feeling about where we're heading. I fear that we're heading into a post-literate society, and so it's wonderful that everybody is here, but you're all adults.
The most moving thing about working in this national treasure is coming in and seeing the school groups. And just yesterday, a middle school group with their shining faces just brightening at the sight of Signers Hall. And you know that those kids with their civic spark are going to take that throughout life. And they're going to remember the moment they came to the NCC and saw the founders, and then you look at American history and the presidents who have deeply engaged with history, and I was surprised by how many of them caught that spark when they were kids. So being lovers of history and reading and lifelong learning begins early. We are reaching those kids, but Jeff, you're absolutely right. It comes down to reading. And in the end, if people are not reading, then the republic will fall.
I was so impressed. It was Theodore Roosevelt who jotted down the things he was reading while president. And it was just, it wasn't Dan Brown, put it that way. It wasn't Colleen Hoover, whoever that is. It was, I mean, this is a serious man trying to build an inner life from which would spring thought, optimism, hope, a plan. And it strikes me as, and we've had many presidents in the modern age, including George W. Bush and Barack Obama, who were readers.
I'm so glad you noticed that list.
It's a really intimidating list when you get there.
At the very end, I say, think about the presidents who were not only deep readers of American history, but wrote biographies, often of Hamilton and Jefferson themselves. Theodore Roosevelt sends his list of 122 books that he's read in his first year in the White House to the President of Columbia. They're books in English and French. And they include one of his own. He's just finished a deep biography of Gouverneur Morris, of all people, and I just relied on Roosevelt's Gouverneur Morris book for my learning about Gouverneur Morris. But it starts with, let's do the list to inspire ourselves. John Quincy Adams first notices that the battle between Hamilton and Jefferson defined the rise of Americans' political party in the battle between national power and states' rights. Martin Van Buren writes the first political history of America's parties and defines their rise in Hamilton-Jefferson's clash between democracy versus rule by elites. Lincoln, of course, in the log cabin is reading the Bible and Shakespeare and studies the records of the Constitutional Convention in the Springfield Law Library and concludes that the Constitution was largely anti-slavery. James Garfield reads Hamilton's works when they've just been published by Hamilton's son in 1850 and leads a Hamilton revival during Reconstruction. During the election of 1912, Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and Taft all are historians who write biographies of or about Hamilton and Jefferson. Franklin Roosevelt collects stamps and reads about Jefferson and traces his ancestry back to the founders. Harry Truman is the most inspiring. He falls asleep and the bulb burns a hole in his pillow because he's reading primary sources about Jefferson, and he quotes Jefferson's letters from memory to Justice Hugo Black when they're hanging out and talking to the GW graduating class. JFK writes and reads history. We're almost there, but in the modern era, Nixon, of course, he says, I may not be educated, but I do read books. And he did, and he wrote them, and he cared a lot. Sorry, I can't resist. He cared a lot about history. Carter is a deep reader and writer. And then think about the modern era. We have Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, who quote Hamilton and Jefferson based on their own deep reading. And George Bush says, I read a lot of history. So that list by itself, for me, is
someone's missing from your list.
Who is that?
And by that I mean Joe Biden. That was a little trick.
Absolutely, on a nonpartisan basis. No, I'm literally just looking. The way I wrote this book.
You're a bright side of life guy tonight. I can see that.
I just put in. It's so exciting to be alive today because all the books are online and you can just search them word for word. So I just plugged the words Hamilton and Jefferson into all the primary texts in American history, and these aren't some hidden codes. They're just everywhere. They're at the center. They're quoted by name by all these figures, presidents, Supreme Court justices, and citizens at every stage. And the point of the recent presidents is that Obama, George W. Bush, and Clinton quoted them by name and made them their own. So I think we're lucky to have had the presidents.
It is interesting, and sticking with the nonpartisan nature of this august institution, I will measure my words with teaspoons. It is interesting to me that it would be so tempting if you were elected president of the United States to spend half your time wandering the White House, wandering the Library of Congress, calling any historian alive in the world at 3 a.m. and saying, look, I'm sorry to wake you up, but I gotta ask you this question about Gouverneur Morris. And they would be like, yes, Mr. President, what do you need to know? And not doing it. That's the interesting thing, like not being interested in the office. And I wanna pivot in a second to talk about presidential power, the use, abuse, and expansion of presidential power. You end the book in talking about our current moment and the challenges of our current moment. But it always struck me as, the White House as an intellectual wonderland, if you wanted it to be that, and to think who occupied the office beforehand and understand how they made decisions. I mean, it seems like there's a tremendous amount of material that would help a person grow as president if that person wanted to grow as president. But let me ask you, let's go, we have approximately 37 minutes to decide who we like better, Hamilton or Jefferson. And I say that only semi-jokingly because I will frequently call Jeff and say things like, hey, what am I supposed to think of Stephen Hopkins anyway? And he'll always, in a non-condescending way, give me a very smart answer. So, I mean, I don't want to boil this down to something that's too simple, but I'll phrase it this way. Is Jefferson Jefferson without Hamilton, and is Hamilton Hamilton without Jefferson? And are you arguing that they are two sides of a coin, and without those two sides, we wouldn't have the country and the democracy that we know today?
Yes, that is the crucial idea. The image that came to mind was that the ideas of Hamilton and Jefferson are like golden and silver threads woven throughout American history. Sometimes they're side by side, sometimes they cross, sometimes they pull so far apart that they threaten to snap, but it's the productive tension between the two that sustains the American idea, and the rare occasions when radicals on either side have pulled too far on one side or the other, both sides tumble over, and the shooting begins. It's the moments when people are rejecting the debate that lead to violence, and that's why I end the book with that image that when Hamilton dies, Jefferson places his bust across from his own in the central entrance hall at Monticello, and when Jefferson passes it, he would smile faintly and say, opposed in life as in death. And for Jefferson—
By the way, the part that really stuck with me on that was that Jefferson had a bust of himself in his
And between the two of them is Ariadne, the Greek goddess. So,
it's like, all right, slow down.
And some elk horns, they're all still there moldering.
To set the stage, take 1 minute and describe the differences in their outlook about federal power and power of elites and the power of a presidency. Just if you can boil it down to its essence so we have a floor.
It all boils down to their debate over the Bank of the United States, which encapsulates all of the tensions that have sustained American politics and law ever since. Hamilton favors national power. Jefferson favors states' rights. Hamilton favors liberal construction of the Constitution. Jefferson favors strict construction. Hamilton favors rule by elites. Jefferson favors democracy. Hamilton generally favors strong executive power. Hamilton, the check of the judiciary. Hamilton favors urban financiers. Jefferson, rural farmers. Those are the basic antitheses that define
Based on
American
your
politics.
reading of American history, who had a more realistic grasp of human limitations, Hamilton or Jefferson?
At the beginning I say that unlike all previous chroniclers who are unapologetic partisans for one guy or the other, and by the way, they're always exalting the manliness of their favorite founder and kind of dissing his opponent as a sissy, really. Henry Cabot Lodge and Claude Bowers, it's very much limited by its time. I think it's important in the spirit of allowing citizens to make up their own minds to present their views without taking sides, at least in the initial debates. However, since you ask about human nature, it's Jefferson's rosy view of human nature that leads him with Condorcet and the French physiocrats to imagine the perfectibility of man and the slow growth of reason across the globe, creating a kind of universal Eden, even as he's blind to the terrors of the French Revolution and the brutality of slavery and his own hypocrisy and relying on it. So there's something about Jefferson's extreme rose-colored glasses that also allow him to blind himself to his own contradiction. In that sense, Hamilton is obviously more realistic.
Was Hamilton a pessimist about human nature like Madison, or was he a kind of, if you encourage people through structure, the strong central government structure, we can build the civilization?
Hamilton reads the same Scottish Enlightenment philosophers as Madison, in particular Hume, who's his favorite philosopher. Hume inspires his visions on free trade and also on the need for a strong executive power. Hume takes the Tory view of history as opposed to the empowering Parliament. But unlike Madison, at the end of his life, is modestly optimistic that the structural checks of the Constitution may prevent passion from triumphing over reason. But Hamilton is deeply pessimistic before the duel, and he writes this agonized letter saying, "This world was not made for me, and the greatest threat we face is democracy." He's completely disillusioned about the dangers of the mob. He fears that we need...
How does he define democracy? And how does he get to the danger? What does he see the nature of democracy? How does he define the nature of democracy?
Democracy is rule of the mob, is direct populist rule of the people. Remember that Hamilton, like all the founders, calls himself a Republican. Republicanism means government by consent. He believes in representative government. He wants a strong executive. He's always denying the claim that he's a monarchist. And as we can discuss, Jefferson's central claim against Hamilton is that he's a secret monarchist who's yearning to resurrect a kind of
it's true that he wanted George Washington to stick around forever.
He does, and in fact, it turns out he wants George Washington to stick around forever, and in the Constitutional Convention, he stands up and says, we must have a president elected for life. And there are gasps. I mean, it goes way further than other delegates, although Gouverneur Morris and the other Federalists also want a life term for president, so it's not a completely exotic position among the Federalists. He stresses that he's against a hereditary monarchy. He thinks the president should be elected so he can resist the importunations of the mob. So what defines Hamilton's experience is Shays' Rebellion, where the mob is rising up in western Massachusetts, attacking the bankruptcy courts. He's mobbed at Columbia. The president of Columbia is attacked by a mob. He later is, stones are thrown at him while he's defending the bank, and Jefferson approves of this and says that he, wishes that vigorous violence should oppose Hamilton.
Just open a parenthesis here. Talk about the moment that the president of Columbia was attacked by stones. And I don't mean like 6 months ago. I mean 200 years ago.
So this is...
It's good that history progresses, isn't it?
President Cooper, he's a Tory, and he is attacked by the students, and Hamilton smuggles him out the back door. Although Hamilton's on the revolutionary side, he has a strong sense of the civil liberties of Tories, as did John Adams in Boston.
Right.
But that fear of democracy, and Gouverneur Morris shares it, and basically the whole Federalist Party does, is broadly common to all the delegates to the convention. There are no defenders of unchecked democracy, except James Wilson, interestingly, who's the academic Democrat. Yeah, right. He's in there. His nose was always high, and he's considered the philosopher James de Caledonia. And although he's always defending democracy in the abstract and doesn't want property requirements, and he's the only guy who wants a directly elected president, and has the great idea that we, the people as a whole, have the sovereign power. At the same time, he's always getting mobbed. And the guy who's defending democracy on Market Street is attacked by a mob. It's called Fort Wilson, and a British soldier is killed. And then during ratification, he's defending democracy with these rose-colored glasses, and he's mobbed in Carlisle for being a secret Tory. It was mostly his arrogance, the fact that he really wanted to be on the Supreme Court. He's kind of a professor type who thinks he's smarter than everyone else, but he alone defends democracy in the abstract. All the other delegates to the convention want some kind of checks on democracy, which makes Jefferson, who's not at the convention, so unusual. But that's why Jefferson becomes the great prophet of democracy for the rest of American history, because he has the vision to realize that extending the franchise first to white men and then beyond is actually the future of America.
I'm going to cut you a favor by planting a question that you can think about before you have to answer. I want to come back to this at the end, because it's so interesting when you say the threat of democracy. It sounds elitist and anti-democratic. When you substitute the word mob for democracy, well, we all hate mobs. But if democracy becomes synonymous with mob, then this is finished as a project. And the question, obviously, is can democracy survive the age of social media and AI? We're not going to do it right now because we're going to talk instead about the fateful dinner. Because I think a lot of this book hinges on what ultimately may have been a misunderstanding about Hamilton's proclivities. I want to come back to this question about today later. But describe, tell them I'll call them back, except if it's the president. I got to take it, I always have to take it. It's Pete Hegseth. Talk about that dinner.
Wow.
And how that is the kind of root of this competition between the two, and this mutual fear that the two men had.
I call it the dinner party that defined America. It's in the room where it happened, but not the one where they moved the capital from Philly to D.C. in exchange for assuming the national debt. This is a year later. It's also at Jefferson's house. Jefferson has 3 portraits on the wall. Hamilton says, "Who are those?" And he says, "They're my 3 greatest men in history, John Locke, Francis Bacon, and Isaac Newton." And Hamilton pauses for a long time and then blurts out, "The greatest man that ever lived was Julius Caesar." And Jefferson writes in his diary that night, "This proves that Hamilton is not only for a monarchy, but for a monarchy bottomed on corruption." And he goes on to found the Democratic Republican Party in supposed opposition to the aspiring Caesarism of Hamilton and the Federalists. Now, what makes the dinner so significant is that, as Ron Chernow, who was here last Friday to receive the Liberty Medal, it was such an honor for me to give it to him, Ron Chernow says that Hamilton was almost certainly joking because he spends his whole life also worrying about the dangers of Caesarism, but he fears that Caesar will come from below rather than above, from courting the mob. And he cites Shays' Rebellion, the mob of debtors in western Massachusetts. And he writes in Federalist 22, "Imagine that Shays' Rebellion had been headed by a Caesar or a Catiline. The Republic would have fallen in its cradle." Jefferson too fears Caesar, but from above rather than below. He notes that Caesar crossed the Rubicon, flattered the mob, and persuaded the Senate to give up its prerogatives, to stop doing its job. And therefore, he wants a 1-year term limit for the president so that he won't be tempted to court the mob. Hamilton, by contrast, wants a life term, so he also will be immune from populist temptations. So in other words, both Hamilton and Jefferson fear Caesar, and both believe that they've found Caesar in Aaron Burr. Hamilton says so wonderfully, "If we have an embryo Caesar, 'tis Burr." And he rightly fears that Burr is conspiring to lead a secessionist movement in Spanish Louisiana and install himself as a dictator of Mexico. And Henry Adams finds in the archives this letter where Burr writes to the British ambassador and offers his services. I don't know why previous historians are still defending Burr, because he's dead to rights. And Hamilton sacrifices his life because although he distrusts Jefferson, in the election of 1800, he despises Burr as a traitor who will subvert the Republic, and Burr gets wind of this, and that's why he dies.
By the way, I'm very relieved to know that the National Constitution Center at least takes a strong position on the Aaron Burr question. That's good. I'm glad that you're out there with that.
It took a while to figure it out. People are constantly defending
Justifying
it.
yeah.
But for me, it's a significant story because both it shows that a demagogue can come either from below or from above. Both Hamilton and Jefferson were right about the potential sources of Caesarism. And for the rest of American history, we've been wondering who is the next embryo Caesar.
Can I veer to Washington for 1 second?
Veer away.
Let me veer. Ultimately, I think our course, dispute this if you will, ultimately our course was on the question of the limits of presidential terms and presidential power was set not by Hamilton or Jefferson, but by Washington's singular Cincinnatus-like decision to say, you know what, I'm going home. I know you guys all want me to stick around forever, but everybody should take a turn being president. Thank you. I just want to be called president. I don't want to be whatever crazy titles they were thinking about him. So in other words, again, this is my position, but until January 6, 2021, George Washington had set the parameters of the discussion around presidential power and presidential vacating of the White House. Is that fair?
Yes, the indispensable man, the greatest man of his age, as the King of France said, if he steps down voluntarily, he will be the greatest man in the world, because no one had done it before. And because all the pressures were on Washington to stay. Hamilton and the Federalists are begging him to stay. In fact, Gouverneur Morris writes to Washington during Adams' first term and begs him to come back because he doesn't trust Adams. And remember, at Newburgh, there's threats of a military coup, and Washington has the opportunity to install himself as a permanent dictator or to be toppled by the troops, and instead he mounts the temple of virtue and appeals for patience and prudence and puts on his reading glasses, and the soldiers weep. This is unprecedented in American history. So and the Constitution says so little about executive power. He defines it through all of his actions, by receiving ambassadors, by what he does and what he doesn't do, but mostly by the calm, self-mastered act of stepping down.
Right. I think I've never been in a conversation in which Gouverneur Morris is mentioned so frequently. So I'm pretty sure of it, actually.
I'm so into him.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that. You're a kind of a fan of Gouverneur Morris. And I thought maybe you could insert him into this double helix narrative a bit and tell us what role he played. He's a lesser known of the founders. I don't want to necessarily say a lesser founder.
Well, he shares Hamilton's...
Oh, tell them what you learned about him, by the way. How to say his name.
Oh, yes, thank you. It's Gouverneur. When you're just talking to your friends about what you learned about Gouverneur Morris, you'll call
Saturday
him...
night, you're at a party, just drop that one.
It's Gouverneur.
People will inch away from you. Subtly, but very, very quickly.
He's the groovy goovy, and his politics are Hamilton. So he flirts with the idea of a president elected for life. He deeply distrusts democracy, but he stands for union and national power above all. He writes the preamble, those beautiful words, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union," are Gouverneur Morris's, because he's on the Committee of Style, and he immortally encapsulates the idea of national sovereignty. He's also the greatest opponent of slavery at the Constitution, and at a time when Roger Sherman is compromising with South Carolina to enshrine slavery, he calls it an eternal curse on heaven. And then, as if that's not enough, he goes to become ambassador to France. This is what I wanted to tell you downstairs. I just learned this morning about Roger Sherman. Roger Sherman opposes Gouverneur Morris's appointment on the grounds that he's not an orthodox Puritan. He hasn't professed a personal confession. He calls him irreligious. Roger Sherman is a Puritan theocrat who's trying to resurrect test oaths in the Constitution. He fails. Gouverneur Morris is appointed.
Not simply a cobbler from Connecticut, in other words.
He doesn't know a participle from a predicate, but he is just a simple cobbler from Connecticut. We're both fans of 1776, which I'm sure most of you are too. You know what? I'll stop telling the Gouverneur Morris story. This is in the next book, which will be the final book in this trilogy, The Pursuit of Union. I'm going to tell the story of the forgotten founders who made the convention: Gouverneur Morris, Roger Sherman, James Wilson, and John Rutledge. But Morris is an inspiring stand-in for Hamilton. Even he's not sure when he gives Hamilton's funeral oration whether or not Hamilton was really yearning to reestablish a monarchy in America, which suggests that there may have been something to Jefferson's fears.
Take us through to Teddy Roosevelt. There's something so interesting about Roosevelt. He's a synthesizer in a kind of way. He's the man who represents the idea of Hamiltonian pursuits for Jeffersonian ends. He sees that you can actually build a helix with these two. Bring us up to Roosevelt and along with that, the waxing and waning of their reputations. I always thought Roosevelt was so interesting because he was like, no, you can have your cake and eat it too when it comes to the dominant competing philosophies of American governance.
The waxing and waning is so fascinating, and it really culminates an inflection point in Roosevelt. So Hamilton dies in the duel, and everyone's a Jeffersonian. Hamilton's politically toxic, the Federalist Party is dead, and the Whigs embrace Jefferson as their model. Henry Clay studied with Jefferson's law tutor, and everyone in the era of good feelings is Jeffersonian. Lincoln stands in front of Independence Hall, and let's look at it to inspire ourselves, as always, when we have the privilege of sitting here. And he's right in front of Independence Hall in 1861 and says, I have never had an idea that did not come from Jefferson and the Declaration. I would rather be assassinated on this spot than abandon the principles of Jefferson. And in the Civil War, both the enslavers and anti-enslavers are invoking the states' rights Jefferson against the Jefferson of the Declaration. Then the Civil War ends, and suddenly Jefferson's reputation crashes, and Grant banishes a statue of Jefferson that President Polk had moved to the White House back to the Capitol in disgrace.
That's quite a move.
It was heavy. They had to pick it up and carry it. And for the first time,
I was being metaphorical. But you're okay.
He's completely in the doghouse. And for the first time, a statue of Hamilton arrives in the Capitol. James Garfield reads the works of Hamilton, and during the Reconstruction debates, everyone's invoking Hamilton on behalf of vigorous
Was Jefferson
national
in
power.
bad odor specifically because of slaveholding, or was it the general
nullification? I mean,
pure nullification was
the really sad turn at the end of Jefferson's life is that he embraces both a state's ability to nullify federal laws that it disagrees with and secession. And that's too much for Madison. Madison insists that secession is unconstitutional, and having joined the Union, a state can't unilaterally withdraw. But Jefferson disagrees, and he's so dark and pessimistic at the end of his life. He rightly fears the Civil War over slavery. He says, we have a wolf by the ears, but there's nothing we can do about it. And he just embraces a radical vision of states' rights and of strict construction of the Constitution that's considered completely beyond the pale after Antietam. So Grant resurrects Hamilton, but then comes this second Hamilton revival in the Gilded Age with another best-selling book. It's called The Conqueror, the True and Romantic Story of Alexander Hamilton by a novelist called Gertrude Atherton, and it's the Hamilton musical of its day. It just completely sweeps the country. Theodore Roosevelt reads The Conqueror. He reads a biography of Hamilton, by a British author, and then he reads Herbert Crowley's Promise of the American Life, which calls on Theodore Roosevelt to deploy what became known as Hamiltonian means for Jeffersonian ends, the Hamiltonian means of a strong federal power for the Jeffersonian ends of curbing the corporations and unchecked monopoly power. And Theodore Roosevelt quotes Crowley almost word for word in his New Nationalism speech and says, I am a Hamiltonian in my approach to federal power and my Jeffersonian in my approach to democracy. It was actually Crowley that inspired me to write this book. I spent 20 years at the New Republic magazine, as we knew each other in those days. Crowley founded the New Republic, and I was reading The Promise of American Life, and that phrase, Hamiltonian means for Jeffersonian ends, was so resonant that I was just kind of curious and wondered whether other historians had traced the battle between Hamilton and Jefferson through American history, and because no one had, I was inspired to write the book.
Right. Okay, now the fun stuff.
All right.
Okay.
Well, this other stuff has been pretty fun.
No,
too.
that was other fun, but this is the really fun stuff. Is Donald Trump philosophically, materially, and actually different in kind from every previous president in his understanding of presidential power and checks on presidential power?
Well, this is a central question of our time, of course.
Vamping.
I don't know if I call that...
That's called... it's an important question, which I will not answer.
I will answer it. I'll answer it the way I answered it in the book. I wouldn't call it the fun stuff, but it's certainly the important stuff. It's a very important...
For the audience.
No doubt.
I mean, most of them have enough of Gouverneur Morris right now.
The fun stuff of them will be... You cannot have
enough Gouverneur Morris in your life.
Actually, the diaries are so spicy, so
I just started
so
them again.
dirty that you'll just get excited reading them. So you want fun.
Self-winding top.
You want fun? Read the diaries of Gouverneur Morris. That's what you should do. Absolutely.
Get the X-rated version.
Absolutely. Yeah. At the end of the book, I raise your question.
Yeah.
Is Donald Trump Julius Caesar or Andrew Jackson? The claim that he's unlike every other president is in his understanding of presidential power is the claim that not just relying on the expansion of the imperial presidency that all 20th century presidents have taken advantage of, President Trump is going a step further by conspiring to subvert the separation of powers, undermine the rule of law, and establish himself as a dictator. That's the case that he's different from every other president. The case that he's like other presidents is that he's Andrew Jackson and not Donald Trump. That he is a populist who attacks elites and is using a previously unimaginable vision of vigorous executive power to kill the Bank of the United States in Jackson's case and the administrative state in Trump's case, to fire nonpartisan civil service appointees and install his own political appointees, as Jackson installed the spoils system, and in the process to defend the values of limited government. So that, and there's a lot to say on both sides. And I do say in the book that I think it's too soon for a historian to tell. We're in the middle of it. But I can make the case on both sides. What do you think? What do you think?
I never know if the I host this show on Friday, Washington Week, and I asked the panel last Friday, or I asked one member of the panel last Friday, are we in the crisis now? Like, you never know when you're in the crisis. And he said, this is a editor of the Dispatch, which was, he's a disaffected conservative. He's still a conservative. He's a disaffected Republican, I guess you would say. And he said, this is the crisis. We're in the crisis. There are always worse things that can happen. We haven't yet seen the muscular flouting of a direct judge's order. Like, you cannot have ICE do X, and the administration has not yet said, we're going to have ICE do X. Come and stop me, Your Honor. We haven't, there are a lot, here's the way it breaks down in my mind. There are a lot of things, a lot of Rubicons have been crossed. There are a lot of Rubicons down the road. And so I don't know, and again, you're absolutely right. 10, 20, 30 years from now, if we're still doing history, I hope, we'll look back and say, okay, this is the moment when it tipped from, what did you call it? A bottomless corruption, or however it was phrased?
Monarchy bottomed on corruption.
Into something truly novel. But I would say that what is novel to me is this. We set up a system of checks and balances, separation of power. We have a judicial branch, a legislative branch, an executive branch. The system only works when everybody is checking each other. And what strikes me as truly novel about this period, as opposed to, say, Watergate, is that the people in charge of Congress, for reasons that I think have to do partially with fear created by the social media mob, literal physical fear created by the social media mob, no longer fulfill their responsibility to use their power to say, and I mean, Watergate ended when the Republicans in the Senate and the House said, okay, this is enough. We're not doing this anymore. Jerry Ford, you're next. We don't have that culture anymore. And so what is remarkable about this period, possibly even revolutionary, is that the legislative branch is absent. And in the absence of a legislative branch, you have this district judge, this judge over here, that judge over there, trying to check the power of the executive, but it's clearly not enough. I don't know, and again, it's not a complete mystery to me why it's happening, but it's still, if you ask me, like, what's the actual most shocking thing, it's that. It's like you get elected to Congress, you would think you would want to use the power the Constitution grants you to perform your constitutionally required duty. That's my speech on that, sorry.
Well, I completely agree that the supine attitude of Congress toward its powers, its willingness to rubber stamp the actions of presidents of its own parties, is the biggest departure from the framers' vision. They viewed Congress as the most dangerous branch, sucking all power into its impetuous vortex, but relied on its vigorous institutional checks to ensure that ambition counteracted ambition. Obviously, that was the Madisonian vision. And the Watergate contrast is striking. The members of the president's own party told him he lost his majority. They would have impeached him. And then after Watergate, the Congress passed all of these reforms checking executive power, including the Impoundment Control Act and the Independent Counsel Act.
And they created a culture around the Justice Department that basically said, yeah, it reports to the president, but not really. Technically, obviously, you're in the cabinet, but actually, you're the lawyer for the United States of America.
Absolutely. That was the Edward Levy model, but it created norms of nonpartisanship that is.
And that is, I mean, that has been destroyed.
But this raises the question of the courts, because the shrinkage of Congress has been taking place ever since the post-90s period. It was really the election of 94 where the polarization really let Congress stop checking president of his own parties. But remember, the Supreme Court in U.S. v. Nixon allowed the subpoena to issue and then upheld all of the post-Watergate impoundment controls. The great question of our time, which we don't yet know the answer to, is will the Supreme Court check the president?
Right, we're not at that Rubicon. We're near the Rubicon.
Well, there are two questions. Will the president defy a direct order by the court? And I completely agree. That's the test of a crisis. And it's never happened before in U.S. history. Jackson famously said, John Marshall's made his decision, now let him enforce it. He didn't actually say those words because the court didn't order him to do anything, but he felt them. Lincoln defies Taney for 2 weeks when Taney orders him to turn over the body, and Lincoln claims he can unilaterally suspend habeas corpus, but it's not an opinion of the full court. Taney's acting as a district judge. No president has ignored a direct order of the court, and this president hasn't either, and he may well not. The court is being careful.
By the way, I'm completely open to the idea that he won't.
Yes.
That there are some things that he and the people around him understand to be the holy of holies. Like, you don't go into that holy of holies. It's completely plausible that they stop before that line. Of course, it's completely plausible that they get the court that they want, or they have the court that they want and need, so it's not necessary.
But that's absolutely right. But then in addition to that, will he disobey a direct court order? There's the question of will the court impose any meaningful checks on executive power? Justice Barrett was here a few weeks ago, and I asked her, Justice Jackson says on the shadow docket, there are just two rules. A, there are no rules, and B, the administration always wins. And Justice Barrett said the administration doesn't always win. We're avoiding committing ourselves to fixed rules without full opinions, but basically stay tuned, and this term is going to be important.
Right.
Birthright citizenship, most people think the court will check the president, and they may well do that. The Fed may have a carve-out, and the other independent agencies are likely to go down in Humphrey's executive. But the big question is this theory of the unitary executive consistent with the visions of Hamilton or Jefferson? Remarkably, it came in the 1980s from Ted Olson and other lawyers at the Reagan Justice Department who quoted Hamilton in the Pacificus letters on behalf of the president's broad power in foreign policy. And it's embraced by many of the current conservative justices served in those administrations and came in the 80s to embrace a really vigorous vision.
Would Hamilton look at what's happening right now and say, yeah, in my capacious understanding of what a powerful president does, this is all within that bandwidth. This is all explicable and not anti-American.
No, Hamilton is centrally afraid of financial corruption by the president. That's why he wants a life term, so the president won't be tempted to line his pockets. Hamilton, there is a moment at the famous dinner that defined America where John Adams says, purge the British Constitution of its corruption and it would be perfect. And Hamilton blurts out, purge it of its corruption, it would lose what makes it its perfection. As it is the most perfect Constitution. So that's where Jefferson gets the idea that Hamilton favors corruption. But Hamilton is using corruption in the sense that David Hume used it, because he quotes Hume on corruption at the Constitutional Convention, meaning the president has to be able to appoint people to offices in order to ensure their allegiance to the Union. Corruption in the sense of offering favors. He does not mean financial corruption, and he has many essays about how impeachment will ensure that a financially corrupt president will immediately be removed, how the president is more constrained than the governor of New York in many ways because he can't fire all offices, so he did not embrace this unconstrained vision of the unitary executive theory the way that it's being deployed. And there's no sign in anything that Hamilton or Jefferson or any of the founders wrote that they believed in presidential immunity from criminal prosecution. That wasn't an originalist argument. It was a pragmatic fear that the president shouldn't prosecute his predecessors. Amazingly, and the history is just so revealing here, John Marshall has the same fear. And that's why he insists on a high definition of treason for Aaron Burr, because he doesn't want Jefferson just prosecuting his political rivals for treason without meeting the constitutional standard. But Marshall, I hope this isn't too geeky, but it's really striking, Marshall allows the Burr subpoena to go forward, and Jefferson, although he contemplates defying the court, which he despises, succumbs, establishing the tradition of presidential compliance and the amenability of presidential subpoenas. The most surprising thing about U.S. v. Trump, I'm just being descriptive here, is it might have made the Burr and Nixon subpoenas themselves unissuable, right, which confirms that it has nothing to do with Hamilton or Jefferson's original understanding.
Right. Let me come to that last question that I wanted to ask you, because you talk about there was a climate of fear in Philadelphia and elsewhere at various points, various pockets of rebellion. Our politicians are humans. Our Congress is made up of humans who fear going home to their districts because of the capacity of our technology to create virtual worldwide mobs instantaneously that sometimes give malignant birth to a guy or a couple of guys with guns who think, I'm gonna actualize this thing. My question is, and I guess I should preface this by saying that it was only in the age of social media and now with the various threats that AI and deep fakery and the splintering of reality pose, I feel more Hamiltonian or even Madisonian than ever. I was never, Jefferson's vision is lovely. Everybody loves a farm. It's great. No, it's great. I mean, and there's honesty in the nobility and the kind of labor that he was describing, and his vision is fine, but in this period in our history, it doesn't have a lot of salience to me. I've never asked you this, but do you think, given where we are, given the abdication of Congress that's motivated in part by fear, intimidation, and so on, can we survive as a democracy, as a democratic republic, if these trends that we're seeing in the diffusion of information and the prevalence of intimidation, if these continue?
No, we can't. The founders believe
Okay, good night,
we cannot.
everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for coming.
But this was your question about social media. It's the central question. It's as important as the question of, is President Trump Caesar?
I mean, you taught me once that Madison feared the rise of the daily newspaper.
Yes.
Once a day delivery of information was too much cognitively, they didn't have that word then, I guess, but cognitively for the average human to absorb, de-emotionalize it, and move on with the day.
Exactly, and his hope for America, he thinks the Republic's entire success turns on the broadside press, paper magazine-like instruments that will disseminate complicated arguments like the Federalist Papers, and citizens will take the time, to use your initial word, to read these arguments, deliberate with each other, and reason will slowly spread across the land. He believed that the Republic would fall without the Atlantic, basically.
Yeah,
but
that is true.
It is
Which
true.
is why you should subscribe today. For the low introductory price.
Well, it is your duty not only to subscribe, but to read it and to debate it and to talk about it and to dig. This is all the urgent importance of taking time and to listen to this discussions like this. But what is, you're right.
But I think we're living in at least a Madisonian, if not a Hamiltonian nightmare right now.
Well, that piece I did for you back at the rise of social media was Madison's nightmare was social media, because he insists on a republic of reason rather than passion. And you know, I'd love, as you know, to quote that Madison on the mob: "In all large assemblies of any character composed, passion never fails to wrest the scepter from reason. Even if every Athenian had been Socrates, Athens would still have been a mob." What is he saying there? He's saying if all Athenians are deliberating together in the Agora, which is about 6,000 people, even if all of them were the most educated of all citizens, they would whip themselves into a frenzy and polarize and become a mob. Because a mob is defined by passion rather than reason, and susceptible to demagogues. What's a demagogue? They'll flatter the people to care about bread and circuses and self-interest rather than the public interest, and they won't listen to competing points of view, and they'll own the libs or own the conservatives. They'll be more interested in defeating and destroying their opponents than in listening to competing points of view. And this is why Madison and all the framers are fans of Polybius. And let's just remember what the Polybian warning is, because this is Constitution 101 that all the founders are getting. In all pure forms of government, it degenerates into its opposite: monarchy into tyranny, aristocracy into oligarchy, and democracy into anarchy and the mob. So that's why it's not that democracy is entirely bad, but you have to check it against other forms. That's why you need an aristocratic Senate, as Gouverneur Morris said, so the landowning elites will be able to check the people. Gouverneur Morris accurately predicts that when the king puts all the power in the Estates General and the nobles and elites surrender their votes to the Democratic branch, he's finished. And that's why he wants the separation of powers. But to dig into your question, which is the urgent existential question of our Constitution, can we have a republic or a democracy that survives in an age of social media where instead of deliberation in Congress and checks from the other branches, we have rule by social media posts and by tweets and
quick reaction.
The quick reaction. Posts based on passion travel further and faster than those based on reason, and they're based on emotions, and they foment loyalty to men rather than laws, men and women. We have a government of laws rather than men, and there was Tom Edsel had a really good piece recently about how polarizing social media is and how difficult it is to listen to the other side and to deliberate. So the founders' fears of democracy, and Hamilton's in particular, suddenly look prescient. He is not, in fact, in favor of elite hereditary rule, but he's really afraid that unchecked democracy is going to lead to polarization and threaten liberty. And that's why, although he likes strong executive power, he's ultimately in favor of limited government. And Jefferson, in his more extreme romantic moments, chillingly seems to endorse the French terror, is indifferent to the thousands who are falling to the guillotine, and says that the blood of tyrants has to be moistened with democracy. I mean, he's really a zealot. He sounds almost Marxian in some of those moments. So, but for the future, I don't know. I mean, it has to do with, ultimately with deep reading and listening to differing points of view, which is why what we're doing now and try to do at the center is so
and I'm glad that this
important.
place exists.
I mean,
because
this
is one of the last institutions in America where conservatives, liberals, Republicans, Democrats actually can have substantive and so you should be thanked for that.
Well, it's such an honor to do it, and it's very inspiring because, as you know, we don't have mushy, kumbaya stuff. We have strong liberals and strong conservatives, but I think it's very important that we're only talking about constitutional and historical rather than political questions. Debating policy or politics is not all that productive in a polarized age, but debating the Constitution requires you to take time to dig in, to learn something. You cannot possibly have an informed opinion about any of these questions until you take the time to geek out. And here, back to history, and it was, I don't know whether it's more or less optimistic about American history and following these threads. I'm pessimistic in the sense that I found it shocking, the persistence of white supremacist and racist violence. I mean, the subversion of Reconstruction by the Supreme Court in these outrageous, strict constructionist opinions that embraced methodologies that they'd previously rejected, that completely subverted the promise of the Reconstruction Amendments and led to violence and ended the rule of law for a century. It was just shocking.
This is the central contradiction. The country, the American story is a story of the expansion of rights and progress, and it's also an Ecclesiastes story. There's nothing new under the sun at the same time sometimes. And right now we're in a period of some reaction, but we've never gotten past the Civil War, obviously. By the way, and this is a particularly brilliant moment, but no one describes the true tawdry, repulsive nature of Jefferson's personal and business arrangements. No one does it better than Jeff, and at the same time, you see the glory of Jefferson at the same time. It's very, very, I can't wait for you all to read this because it will enlighten you, especially on those matters.
Thank you for that. But it's not on the other hand, but it's not, although the racism, the subversion, the betrayals of the ideals are dark and shocking, it is inspiring to see how people are constantly aspiring to live up to the ideals themselves. And the fact that it's Jefferson that Prince Hall and David Walker and obviously Frederick Douglass and ultimately King on the Mall turned to make real the promissory note. The fact that the debaters over in the nullification debate are just digging in deep, reading the opinions of John Marshall, going back to the convention and trying to figure out what Hamilton or Jefferson would have said about the necessary and proper clause. These are they're the words that make us, the ideals that bind us, and people are constantly returning to them, even in the modern age. I didn't realize how frequently and specifically Hamilton and Jefferson were invoked by name by Bill Clinton and Obama and by citizens today, including at Charlottesville and January 6th. So that's ultimately, first of all, it's inspiring to have the privilege of studying American history with the rigor and depth that our predecessors have studied it, and to argue about the Constitution is a birthright and a responsibility. It's not just some civics privilege. It's something that our people have done so rigorously, and ultimately that's what ultimately keeps us together. We have to speak to each other if we're going to keep this debate going.
Yeah.
And when you think about the purpose of a union, to set aside our parochial, selfish, ego-based interests and to think about the greater good, it's these ideals that sustain
the best
a union.
way I know, and I'll close with this, the best way I know to understand and visualize the perfection of the ideas and the imperfections of the men who created the ideas is in the National Museum of African American History. Lonnie Bunch devised, the founder of that and the current secretary of the Smithsonian, devised a brilliant Thomas Jefferson exhibit. There's a statue of Jefferson, large statue. Behind him is a brick wall that curves around him and chiseled in the bricks are the names of every slave, every enslaved person that we know, whose name we know, that Jefferson owned. The sin is, and it's taller than Jefferson, the sin is greater than the man. And then behind that, 2-story high, the opening words of the Declaration of Independence. So the idea is greater than the sin is greater than the man. And it's a brilliant, you could either go up or down depending on your mood, but it's a brilliant rise to the ideals, and that's America. Like, we're trying, and we're imperfect, and the brilliance of this experiment is that we have built in, if we use the tools, we have the tools to make it better. And that's a huge, and you should go to the Smithsonian now before it's turned into a professional wrestling compound. Go see it while you can. But Jeff, let me just say, if you don't mind, it's always a pleasure to come and chat with you and see so many involved citizens. And I just have to say, I get to meet a lot of interesting people in my line of work, but I think sort of minute for minute, there's no one I could think of who I learn more from every minute that I listen to him than Jeff. Thank God somebody's reading Gouverneur Morris, and so thank you for having me up here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here.
And buy the book. Read the book.
This episode was produced by Bill Pollack and Griffin Ritchie. It was recorded by Advanced Staging Productions, Dave Stotts, and mixed by Bill Pollack. Research was provided by Samson Mastashari and Cooper Smith. I hope you'll purchase a copy of The Pursuit of Liberty, How Hamilton versus Jefferson Ignited the Lasting Battle Over Power in America. You can get it at your favorite bookstore, and if you'd like a signed book plate, please email me at jrosen@constitutioncenter.org. Please recommend the show to friends, colleagues, or anyone anywhere who's eager for a weekly dose of constitutional debate. Sign up for the newsletter at constitutioncenter.org/connect. And always remember that the National Constitution Center is a private nonprofit. We rely on your generosity, passion, and engagement for all our programming, including this podcast. Please consider donating at constitutioncenter.org/donate. On behalf of the National Constitution Center, I'm Jeffrey Rosen.